Howdy, and welcome to episode 57 of T-Shirts and Shawls. I'm Karen, and today is Thursday, June 28th, 2018. So this past weekend was Houston Fiber Fast, and I want to talk quite a bit about that in this episode, but I also have other things to talk about. I have a few questions for Karen in that thread on the Ravelry forum, and we have the approaching the end of the second quarter knit along and then the beginning of the third quarter knit along, so I want to talk about that. I've done a fair amount of stashing since I last talked to you guys, definitely more than I have been doing recently, so it seems like a lot to me. And I think there are a couple of other little things. So this will probably be a slightly different structure, kind of order of things that I talk about, since I have Houston Fiber Fest to talk about. And I think that is actually where I'm going to start. So for Houston Fiber Fest, and by the way, probably should move the camera down a little bit. Luna is over here on the couch with me. She is definitely in chewing mode. If you hear any noises, that is probably her. And so Houston Fiber Fest this past weekend, it was the 4th year for Houston Fiber Fest, my 3rd year to attend because I did not go the 1st year. And this year there were some differences, both for the Fiber Fest itself and then for my booth. So the Fiber Fest itself in the past, hang on, she just dropped her toy. In the past, it was always in the Berry Center, which is a conference center in Cypress, Texas, so a suburb of Houston. And it was in not a small room, but in a smaller room. And it was a pretty decent, sized vendor hall, especially for a festival that was only really just starting. And this year, they moved it, still in the convention center, but to the arena part of the convention center. So we were actually in the arena with all the stands and bleachers that went all the way up really high, which was a little strange. Kept thinking, are there people up there, looking down and watching us? But I just tried to kind of ignore that and not think about it too much. But it was kind of it gave the vendor hall a very open feeling. Which in many ways was nice. And then it also allowed them to be able to have space at the back of the vendor hall to create a stitching lounge and demo area. And my booth was actually technically at the back of the hall, but that meant that it was facing that stitching lounge section, so which was kind of nice because then people could sit there and stare at my yarn. So, and then some people came up and said, okay, I've been staring at this yarn and I have to have it. And so it actually was kind of a good selling feature. As for me personally, like DFW, I had a double booth here at Houston, but I had the end cap. So that means that basically instead of like with DFW where I have the back wall and then the two sides and there are booths on both sides of me, the end cap is at the end of a row of booths, and so therefore I have 3 sides open. So all I have is the back that has booths behind me. And she's digging into the couch because her toy fell in there. So the end cap, so I had 3 sides that were open. So that allowed me to play with yet another type of booth setup and to kind of see what that experience was like. The end cap is usually seen as a desirable placement because it does usually cost a little bit extra. So I was really happy to get that and be able to try that out. And that meant what I did, instead of doing like a wall of grid wall like I usually do, I kind of created these, and I did take pictures, but I didn't do any video this time around. So actually I did a quick live, not live, a quick Instagram stories video, which I think is already, obviously it only lasts for 24 hours, so it's already off my Instagram. But if you follow me on Instagram, that first day of Houston Fiber Fest, you might have seen that pop up in my stories. Anyway, so it allowed me to kind of do these, instead of a wall, these, gosh, what would I don't really know how to call it, more like structures. So what I did is I had like so my grid walls are 2 feet wide by 6 feet tall. And so I created kind of an eye. So there were two of the grid walls. Maybe this is more because it's taller. So 2 grid walls, so 6 feet tall, 2 side by side, so that's 4 feet. And then on either end, I, just like the letter I had, you know, another grid wall panel over here and another grid wall panel over there. So to create kind of that setup. And the nice thing, since it was, you know, since I have basically 2 corners to work with, that I was able to put that at the edge of the corner, and so people could walk all the way around that shape, and I could put yarn on all 4 sides. And so that way, A, it was a way of separating the bases, so I could point people to, okay, everything on this side is this particular base. And B, it really allowed people to kind of, I think, get in and around and see the yarn a little better. So I had 2 of the eye shapes set up on either corner. And then in the front center, I had kind of an offset square, which trying to set that up and figure out exactly how to put the grid wall together was a little challenging, but we got it figured out. Anyway, so kind of an offset square. So where you've got the grid walls that are coming together like that and that and that, and then back here. Probably not describing it very well at all. But anyway, and that was where I put the self-striping. And again, it's something that people could walk around and see all 4 sides of this offset square. And I was able to also kind of spread the self-striping out a little bit, so that way the sock sample could be right next to the actual skeins of that yarn. And then across the back of the booth, I had tables, and then in the middle of my checkout stand. And on one table, I had a lot of the samples and patterns, and then on the other table I had my yarn tasting that I usually do. I brought a light box this time, so that way people could actually put yarn under the light in the light box to be able to see it better, because the lighting in the arena wasn't all that great. And I know that helped people. I also thought that if anyone wanted to take pictures, you know, to put in their stash, they could do that. But I don't know that anybody actually did that. I probably should create some type of sign that goes with that. Anyway, and then I had a couple of other samples on that table. So I was really happy overall with the setup. There are some things that I would change and tweak a little bit. We were on a concrete floor, and I keep thinking about investing in those interlocking foam mats that you can, you know, use to create flooring. I actually have some. That's what I use as my blocking mats. But I was thinking about actually getting some different ones that I make my booth mats, and I create kind of a floor, because I have to admit, looking at my pictures, the concrete floor was really kind of glaringly gray, and I really didn't like it that much. So that is something I definitely want to change, adding some flooring. And I know for DFW Fiber Fest, it's also a concrete floor there. So if I get these foam mats, then I'll be able to use them at least those 2 places, and possibly any other booth setup that I have. So anyway, so the booth setup I felt worked a lot better this time. I really like the end cap. And like I said, end caps are always the kind of really desirable location. It can be hard to get. The way Houston Fiber Fest sets up the vendor hall, there are actually a lot of corners. So I think it was a little easier to get an end cap there. But I don't know if that will always be a possibility, but I think at this point I'm always going to at least ask. And if I don't get it, then I don't get it. But if I don't ask, I will never get an end cap. So I really did like that setup quite a bit. So I'm checking my notes. Okay, the setup. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to mention is I brought somebody with me to help me at the booth. For DFW Fiber Fest, I had really amazing people who came up and worked shifts, usually a 3-hour shift to help me out in the booth. And I thought about doing that at Houston. I felt like I would be able to find people that would do that. But I also felt like I really wanted to make sure I had that covered. And so I brought my friend Alyssa, who watches the podcast. So hello. And so we drove down from Dallas together, and I honestly do not know how I would have been able to make it through the weekend without her. Just very, very helpful to have an extra set of hands for carrying and setting up everything. And then also just to have somebody else in the booth, because there were some times, especially Friday morning, Friday was actually really busy, where I felt like all I was doing, and this is a good problem to have, but I felt like all I was doing was standing at the checkout desk and checking people out. And I wasn't able to really get out and talk to people as they were looking at the yarn. And so Alyssa was there to be able to do that. And so it's extremely helpful to have somebody else in the booth. So that is something definitely, especially with the double booth, there is more room to have an extra person in there. So something I definitely want to keep doing in the future, either having people do shifts like at DFW or having a dedicated person. Although I think she was very exhausted by the end of the weekend and said that, you know, although she's helped out at especially at DFW Fiber Fast with different vendors, she's never really done the full weekend where she is like on the whole time. She said she has kind of a new appreciation for what it's like to be a vendor. And I don't necessarily want to speak for her, so Alyssa, if you want to pop into the discussion thread on this episode, and if you have anything you want to say about your experience, feel free to do that. So as far as sales for Houston Fiber Fest, first of all, if you came by the booth and whether or not you bought anything, thank you so much for coming by. It was great to meet several of you who mentioned that you watched and enjoyed the podcast, so that was fantastic. And especially thank you to those of you who did buy something. I'll just say that the sales were really good. I did better than last year by a long shot, so that's always good. And there was a moment where I thought, potentially I could either match or even go above my sales from DFW Fiber Fest. It didn't quite reach that level, and it wasn't even like super close. But I mean, it definitely was getting up there. So that was really exciting as a business owner, so that was fantastic. As far as self-striping, I mean, you never know. I mean, you can guess as a vendor, you can guess what people might be wanting to buy based upon experiences from years past, or kind of seeing what people are getting excited about, but it's always hard to judge. And self-striping sales were way back up. So I forgot to go check the actual numbers, but I know there were definitely more self-striping that sold at Houston than did at DFW this year. And I'm sure there are many factors that go into that. This was a smaller vendor hall, and there were fewer vendors who did self-striping, so I know that is definitely going to be a factor. People who are specifically searching for self-striping yarn, they didn't have as many vendors to choose from. So instead of having all those sales spread out across a lot of vendors, they were more condensed. And this is something where, you know, I really wish we sometimes talk a little bit about how our shows went, but sometimes I wish some vendors would really like get down and talk really specifics. Like, I sold X number of skeins of self-striping. That would be really helpful to just kind of know, you know, what's average. Anyway, so I do think that helped, having the smaller vendor hall. But also, I mean, it is a different crowd of people. There were a lot of people who either I didn't see at DFW or who were brand new to my yarn. And so just a different crowd of people. And I guess that crowd was a little more interested in self-striping. So there were several colorways that I sold out of. And if you go to my website right now, you'll see a lot of the self-striping colorways are sold out. So I will be dyeing self-striping, but at a slower pace, because it just, using that warping mill and prepping it just kills my shoulder. And it's something that I really want to be careful about. I want to make sure that I'm taking good care of myself so I can continue to do all of this stuff. And so I will be eventually restocking things, but I'm probably going to leave stuff out of stock more often than not, just because I don't want to overdo it, especially with my shoulder. But just a little aside, the next two colorways that I will be dyeing and restocking are the two very brand new ones. The Gradient, which is a Harry Potter related name, Sir Cadogan's pony. And then the new one that I just released, which I don't think I've shown you guys, but I will show you in the what I'm knitting section because I'm still knitting the sample sock. It is a Hamilton inspired colorway, which I have named Hard Rock Like Lancelot, which is how Hamilton refers to the Marquis de Lafayette. Anyway, so I will show you that one in just a little bit. So those will be the two that I'm out of stock right now, but those will be the next two that I restock. Anyway, so self-striping sales were good, which was nice. And I do want to say, I'm pretty sure you watched the podcast. So Tim, Alyssa, and I were talking. I really need to pay you a commission. Remember that checkerwork hat that you made out of the Sword in the Stone colorway? And it works so well with self-striping yarn. So if you've been at my booth at Fiber Fest, you've probably seen this hat. I made that out of my Beads of Arms colorway. So this is the pattern, checkerwork hat. Really, really simple pattern. And then with self-striping yarn, best with 4 colors. 3 colors will work, 2 colors will not. But 4 colors works really, really well. So this hat, this sample, I cannot tell you how many skeins of self-striping yarn I sold specifically for this hat. And not just this colorway. This colorway did sell out, and I had a fair amount of it, so a lot of it sold. And then several people bought other colorways to specifically make this hat. So I would not have found out about this hat and would not have made this sample if it hadn't been for Tim, for you making your own version. So thank you. I really, really should pay you a commission every time I sell something because of that, because that is pretty amazing that that really, really simple hat just catches people's attention. And if any of you guys are dyers or designers or other vendors, samples are the things that sell yarn. Again, not just that hat, but other samples that I had up there. I sold yarn specifically because people got excited by the sample and the pattern, and they bought yarn specifically for that. In fact, there was one person who at DFW Fiber Fest really liked the, what is it called? The Camp Wilkerson wrap that Erica did the sample for me. Out of Avalon, 4 colors. It's this really long rectangular wrap. It's really gorgeous, and oh, I love that sample. And at DFW Fiber Fest, somebody bought the exact same colors that I did the sample in, and she actually finished it in time to bring it to Houston Fiber Fest and show me. And if you are following me on Instagram, I actually posted a picture of her on Instagram, and she did a fabulous job with her version of the wrap, and it turned out really, really nicely. But again, it was because of that sample that she bought the yarn. She got excited about it and bought the yarn. And she ended up with her own really fabulous project. So just a little kind of key for those of you who are vendors. Samples are the thing. They sell yarn. So definitely have samples. And as I start, thinking ahead to getting kind of new samples for next year's shows, I will be contacting sample knitters again and getting some ideas. Crochet too. Houston seemed to have a lot more crocheters. There were definitely crocheters at DFW, but there was a substantial, noticeable number of people who either were only crocheters or who did both. And so they were very excited by the crochet samples that I had. And I also sold some patterns too, and I sold out of almost every crochet pattern that I had. So that is also something to keep in mind. I need more crochet samples. So kind of, every time I do a show, it's always a learning experience to see what happens and what I might want to do for the next show. So it's definitely something I always keep in mind. And I'm glad that I'm doing these podcast episodes and talking about them, because maybe I need to go back as I'm prepping for the next year's show and rewatch my recap just to kind of see, oh yeah, I reminded myself about this or that. So anyway, I hope you find that all interesting. So the other thing for Houston Fiber Fest is when we were driving down to Houston, I told Alyssa, I was like, okay, so usually when people come to the booth, I usually greet them, say hello, how are you doing? But this time I really want to try to get a little more conversation going. So instead of just saying hello, either if they're wearing something, and I want to do this anyway, and I do like doing this, make sure you're kind of complimenting them. Oh, I really like the shawl you're wearing, or asking questions like, are you a knitter or crocheter? What do you like to make? Are you familiar with round table yarns? Just, a little bit more of an opening rather than just a hello. And I told her that, and I told her I was going to try to do that. And you know what? She took those suggestions and ran with them and did an amazing job. I could hear her talking to people. I just got a phone call in the middle of recording, so I had to stop that. Anyway, so I was saying Alyssa took those suggestions and she ran with them, and she was really fabulous about opening up conversations with people. Me, I got stuck back on the, hi, how are you doing? And didn't really make a lot of that jump. And I'm saying it in my head, like, why am I not saying more? And some of it is that I do tend to be a little bit more quiet and reserved by nature, whether or not you believe that by listening to me talk on the podcast here. But that is the case. But also I am very much an introvert in the true sense of the meaning, where I get my energy from being alone. That being around other people, I enjoy being around other people, but it drains my energy. And in order to recharge that energy, I need alone time. And so doing shows like that is very exhausting. I enjoy doing them, but I have to make sure that I kind of conserve my energy level, because I know that I'm not going to have a lot of time to recharge, each evening before the next day. So I have to do what I can to conserve that level, so that by Sunday I'm not just all, oh yeah, this is my booth. At the end of the day on Friday was a really busy day. It was right at the end of the day, and someone was asking about the yarn club, and my brain was not even able to think about some of the ways to respond to her, and she was like, I'm asking you to sell me this, sell it to me. And I couldn't, and I felt so bad, but I had expended the energy that I had for that day, and I really hate that I'm not able to always kind of be the super happy conversationalist. But that is who I am. That is, if you're an introvert, then you probably understand that. And I apologize to, especially to that person and to anyone else who may have gotten a slightly less energetic me, a slightly less conversational me. I try as hard as I can to do what I can. But I could definitely tell. So we stayed at the house of my husband's aunt, which is a really chaotic house. She has her in-laws staying with her, plus she's got some daughters, and her daughters had friends over at various points. And so there was just always a lot of activity and energy going on, which was great, but definitely not a lot of recharge time. And then on Saturday, after the show, I have a friend who actually just recently moved back to Houston, and she happened to be living really close to the area where we were. So we went over to her house and had pizza, and I feel like I just kind of sat down and started eating, and I wanted to catch up with her and chat with her. And she was exhausted because she has 2 young boys, and her husband had been away out of the country even for several weeks. And so she was at the end of that. He was actually coming back the next day. And I was at the end of the show, and I just felt like we were just kind of sitting there staring at each other, and we talked a little bit. But yeah, there was very little energy. I don't think she watches the podcast, but if so, I apologize for, again, not having super conversational skills there. Anyway, but but we got through the show, and I've taken some time to recharge, and so ready to to get back to a knitting group and do other things and to talk to people. And I think there was one more thing on Houston Fiber Fest. Oh, that's the other thing. The other thing that I realize I don't do enough of when people come into the booth is really let them know that all the yarn that they're seeing in the booth, I do the dyeing for it. Because there were a few times where sometimes people would ask me, do I carry such and such yarn? I was like, no, I only carry my yarn. And I don't think people realize when I say my yarn exactly what that means. Or if whenever I said, yes, I dye all the yarn in the booth, so there were people that were surprised, like, oh my gosh, you dye all of this? So I need to figure out some way to maybe make that a little more obvious. I think that because I have been around indie dyers, and even as a customer, I've been buying indie dyed yarn since like 2009. So that's kind of something that I'm very familiar with. And I have to realize that not everyone is familiar with that. There were a few people that I met at the show who really had never been to even a local yarn shop. They mostly bought their yarn at Michael's or Joann or Hobby Lobby, and so they're really not experienced in kind of the wider world of indie dyed yarn. And so I need to realize that I'm making an assumption and taking for granted that people know all about what that is. There was actually somebody who even asked me, what does it mean to be an indie dyer? So I need to figure out some way of trying to get that across a little bit better. The same goes for my patterns for my designs. So I have the two books that my Gawain Shield and Parliament of Cows book out. And there was one person who bought Parliament of Cows, and she was asking about, one of the patterns in there, and we were talking a little bit about it, and I told her, well, my email is in the book, so if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. And she went away, and then just a few minutes later, she came like rushing back to the booth, and she kind of handed me the book. She's like, oh my gosh, this is your book. You're Karen Robinson. And I said, yes, I am. And she was really thrilled, and she asked me to sign the book. And I realized, I guess, again, I'm just making the assumption that if someone walks into the booth, they automatically know who I am and that these books are mine, and the yarn is all mine. So if you have any suggestions, because I want to make it seem natural. I don't want it to seem like I'm trying, I don't know. I want it to seem like a more natural part of the conversation. So I think that's what I'm kind of struggling with and trying to figure out. But now, especially that I'm having more patterns from other people, I can't do what I used to say, I dyed and designed everything that's in this booth. So I've got to figure some of those things out. Anyway, and again, I got to see some fabulous things made out of my yarn. I got to see fabulous people that I only get to see, once a year at Houston. So that was really wonderful. But I also have to say, even though I've got some events coming up later in the year, DFW and Houston are my two big events. And there is a big part of me that is completely relieved that I have finished both of those for the year. I can do some of the smaller events and then take a little bit of a break and then gear back up for next year. But yeah, I am kind of glad that those two things are out of the way for this year, and I can relax and take a little bit of a break, although there's still lots of stuff coming up the rest of the year. Okay, grabbed my project bag. Hopefully everything that I am working on is in here, and I don't have to go chase things away. Okay, so this is my stargazing shawl, which I haven't been working on as much because of the beads and the dog, but I did pull this out last night and worked a couple of extra rows. So I do have, am I showing you, which side am I showing you? I do have a little bit more that I have done on this one, and it's at the point where it is way bigger than or longer than the needles, and so it's going to be all bunched up, and I'm not really going to be able to show it to you in a way that really makes it look great. So try to show it to you a little bit. I did have a little bit of a mistake it seemed like one section where I was 1 stitch off. My stitch count was still right, but the way the pattern was lining up was a little bit off, but I think I have corrected it. And there might be something that's just slightly off in there, but I can't see anything that's super obvious for a mistake. So I now seem to be back on track, and so I'm just gonna kind of move forward, especially since like I said, I don't really see anything that screams out, here's a mistake. But it was just something weird with the stitch count in one of the repeats. But overall, I think it's looking really great. I really love this project. I just started the 5th chart last night, and there are 6 charts total. Charts 5 and 6 are not super big, so I think I'm probably, I say nearing the end, but it is still going to take me a while. But I'm probably nearing the end. I am hoping, I still have quite a lot of yarn left, so I am hoping I should be able to get to at least the very darkest blue. I hope that I can get, I think it's black. It might be just really, really, really dark blue. But hopefully I will get that last color in there at some point, because I really want to make sure to use as much of the yarn as I can in this project. So hopefully I will be able to get a little bit more done on that one. Originally that was supposed to be my entry for the Q2 knit along, but obviously I'm not going to finish that by the end of June. So Tsunami is actually my finished entry for our Q2 knit along. Another project that had been kind of hibernating a bit was self-striping socks from a Brazen Stitchery colorway. So here is the little knitting needle sleeve that I got last year, Houston Fiber Fest from Diana Couture. And Diana, I meant to look at your needle cases this year, your needle hoodies, and get another one. You were right next to me, and I didn't do it. Okay, so I'm gonna have to get one. Anyway, so this is the Brazen Stitchery Molly colorway, and this is the 2nd sock. It had been kind of stuck way up here for a long time, and then I finally did a little bit more, and then I've been picking it up and working on it just a little bit here and there. So this is the 2nd sock, fortunately, but still a little ways to go on that sock. Then my other sock project is the new colorway, which is the Hamilton inspired colorway, Hard Rock Like Lancelot, which I'm really excited about. And this is how that is turning out. So again, I did post this on Instagram, and then if you were at Houston Fiber Fest, there were 6 skeins of this that went out to people. So possibly you were one of the people who got them. Looks like there's a little bit of a bulge right there. Maybe my gauge got off a little bit. I'll have to block it. Anyway, so this is what that colorway is looking like. And I'm really excited about that. And on the website, even though it's out of stock, I still have it listed on the website. So if you want to read a little story behind the name and how this fits into to Hamilton, then it's on the website. And then I'm using the Addi Flexi Flips again for this project, because I did bring this with me to Houston, and I thought that if by any chance I had time to knit in the booth, it would be easier to use these than to use double points. And on Sunday I did have a little bit of time to knit in the booth. Alyssa also had a sock project going, and she was using her Addi Flexi Flips too, and Addi should be paying her a commission, because there were a lot of people that were like, "Ooh, what are those?" And she was telling people all about them. So this is the 2nd project that I've done on these. I haven't gotten to the heel yet. Hopefully it'll go a lot more smoothly now that I'm not thinking like a double point sock knitter. I'm thinking more like a magic loop sock knitter. So hopefully the heel will go more smoothly. But I'm really thinking that doing especially the plain vanilla socks on these Flexi Flips, I think that's the way I'm gonna go. It does seem to be working up a little faster, and now that I've gotten used to the needles, they are a lot more comfortable. Alyssa said that she tried doing a cabled sock with it, and it didn't really work, especially with the cabling without a cable needle technique. So possibly I might not do them on patterned socks. Maybe I'll try it. but definitely vanilla socks. These might be my go-to needles. So we'll see about that. And then I have, what do I have in here? This is my boxy. I have worked a tiny bit on this. I think when I measured it, I'd gotten up to 10 inches. I don't remember. I think I measured it at a knit night at one point. So still got either 4 or 6 inches, because I can't remember now if it's 14 or 16 inches I'm supposed to get to. So still a ways to go on that. And then I started a new project. So this is the, I believe it's called the Frostbite wrap. I think that's right. I will put that in the show notes. Anyway, so I started this new project, and the idea is that it uses mini skeins, and I'm sorry, this is in crinkly plastic. I will try not to crinkle too much. I got this mini skein pack from Canon Hand Dyes when they were at, actually I think it was DFW last year, not this year, but last year. So originally I was going to do On the Spice Market with these, but I decided to do this, this instead. And the green that's folded over, there were 6 that were in the package, and I only need 5. So that's the one that I'm not using. So I've got these 2 purples that will eventually be going in. Get the crinkly away. And then I started with this green, and then kind of this teal color. And now I've just started this blue color. Hopefully you can see. I know that I'm not in my usual space and my usual lighting. But kind of that bluish color, and then it'll go to the 2 purples. And then the main color that I'm using, kind of that rust color, is some Julie Spins yarn that I have had in my stash forever. And actually I had started another project with that yarn years and years ago. I started a project with that yarn that I decided to rip out. So now I'm finally getting to use that yarn. So this is something I'm glad that I get to use. Old stash and slightly newer stash. Still been around for over a year, but slightly newer. And that's a lot of fun. It's got this neat lace panel, and then you've got the kind of the changeover to the next color section. I'm not super thrilled about the color combinations all around, but it's working, even though it's not something I'm loving as much as probably I could. I think it still works, and I will be happy with this at the end. One of the reasons I picked this is because the designer is one of the sponsors for the Into the Wool fiber retreat that I'm going into in September, and we actually get points if we participate in this spotlight knit along, where we do any projects that use things from designers, dyers, notions makers, bag makers that are sponsors or vendors at the retreat. And that pattern is designed by one of the retreat sponsors. So I will be posting that in that spotlight knit along and getting some points for the retreat for that. So those are the things that are on my needles right now. I have a few other things that I would like to cast on, but I have something coming up, which I'm actually going to talk about in the what I'm stashing section. I have something coming up that is going to take up a lot of my knitting time. And so I'm kind of waiting to start new projects until I see how much of my knitting time this other thing is going to take up. So I guess I'll jump to what I'm stashing so I can actually also talk about what that event thing is. Okay, so for stashing, first I have something that I did not get at Houston Fiber Fest, although I technically could have. So Savvy Skeins, Allie is the dyer, and she is also going to be a vendor at the Into the Wool Fiber Retreat in September. So because she is a vendor, using her yarn in a project will again get me points for that spotlight knit along. And I actually do have a really kind of basic pattern that I want to do with this, so I can kind of let the yarn colors be the star. But I had planned to actually start this project before Houston Fiber Fest, and so I bought the yarn at West 7th Wool, which carries Savvy Skeins, and so I bought the yarn there because I thought that I would start the project before Houston Fiber Fest, when I would get to see Allie in person. As you can see, I haven't even wound the yarn yet. so have not even started that project. But I do have the yarn at the ready in case I do want to work on it. It is a superwash merino and nylon, so I might change my mind and actually do a sock project with this. We'll see kind of what happens. But I'm going to do something with this soon. Anyway, I did get to see Allie at Houston Fiber Fest, and we had a lovely conversation, but I did not get her yarn then. Let's see, what order do I want to talk about things? There's something else that I bought not at Houston Fiber Fest, but it goes with something else that I want to talk about. So let's talk about some other Houston Fiber Fest purchases. Okay, so at the Mode Knit Yarn, they had several mini skein kits that were fandom based, and they had this one that is Hamilton based. And so I really didn't even look so much at the colors. I just really kind of wanted it for the names and for the inspiration. So I went ahead and picked that up. Not sure yet what it's going to become, but I will do something with it. This one has a pretty good yardage. So it's 25 grams or 100 yards per skein. So that means there are 600 yards total in the pack. So I should be able to do something pretty good with that. Then the other thing that I got that's not related to the bigger topic that I'm going to talk about is a new bag. So there was this, let's see, what is it? Rhinestones and More. So Rhinestones and More did all these bags, and many of them were fandom based. So I picked up this one. It's a zipper bag, and it just has kind of some black and white in there. But it's a Doctor Who one with the more modern doctors. Although their eyes in the fabric kind of look a little creepy, especially the 9th Doctor. But I overall like this bag, and I thought it was a good size. It's not too small, not too big, and so I thought it was a good addition to my bag collection. So I got that. And then, so I'm going to do something completely crazy. I don't know why I'd agreed to do this, but I did. I'm going to be participating in Tour de Sock. So Tour de Sock basically is this event that starts, you know, kind of along the time of the Tour de France. But fortunately, it actually extends long beyond that. It's not just that, that short, 3 weeks or so that the Tour de France is held. But the idea is that there are 6 sock patterns. There's technically 7 because there's a warm-up sock, but there are 6 sock patterns that get released over the course of this event, and it's a race to basically see how fast can you make these socks and make the pair of socks. And you have to make them specific to the pattern, and they have to be a specific size. So you can't go making like little baby socks or kids socks. You have to make an adult size sock. I think that the smallest it can be, I think that will be the size that does actually fit my foot. I need to double check the sizes. But anyway, so it's a race, and knitting socks as fast as you can, and they're not plain vanilla socks, they are patterned socks. And so I am on a team. We actually have a local team, so DFW Sock Shenanigans. We have 2 teams because there were enough of us that were crazy to participate in this. Teams are made of 7 people, so we've got 2 teams, 14 people that are being crazy and doing this whole Tour de Sock type of thing. The nice thing is that you do, if you participate, you do pay to participate. But it's only $10, and that money goes toward Doctors Without Borders. And 6 socks, actually 7 sock patterns, because you also get the warm-up sock for $10, and then it also benefits a good thing that is a bargain even if you don't do the full competition. So we don't have the sock patterns yet. We only have a little bit of the descriptions, like what kind of yarn is going to be used. And so several of the sock patterns actually say that it wants you to use tonal or semi-solids. And I realized that my sock yarn that I've been buying recently has been pretty much all self-striping. And I think one pattern does say that you can use self-striping, but for the most part, it needs to be tonals or semi-solids for many of them. So although I know I could use my own yarn, I do like to use other people's yarn. So this was not a Houston Fiber Fest purchase. This is a purchase that I made online. So wow, that glare is, from Invictus Yarns, who is one of the Tortoise Sock sponsors. So if I do finish this sock that whichever sock I choose to make this out of, I will get bonus points for my team because I used a sponsor's yarn. So I went ahead and got that. And this is a BFL, so Blueface Leicester and nylon, which I'm looking forward to making some socks out of BFL rather than merino, because I think I know BFL wears better than merino. So that is going to be one of the socks on the Tortoise Sock. Then, speaking of BFL, I went to the Amanda Hope booth at Houston Fiber Fest, and I've got this basket kind of balanced on my lap. I don't want it to fall over. And trying to hold this. Okay, so Amanda Hope yarn, and she has a lot of gorgeous colors, and I saw that she had a small section of BFL. This one doesn't have nylon, but BFL, because it is a harder wearing wool, even without the nylon, it should still be okay for socks. So I picked the gorgeous green called Emerald City. So that will become one of the socks in the Tortoise Sock. Then I stopped by, and the skein kind of popped open, so it looks a little messy, but it's not meant to be. I stopped by Undead Yarn, so Heidi. And I know that she usually in the past has had BFL, and I've bought BFL from her, but we couldn't find any in her sock basket that she had. So I did go with merino and nylon, but I went ahead and picked this this gray. There are some of the socks that want kind of two colors, so a contrast color. I figure possibly I could use this as a contrast color and then pick something bright, even though there's lots of different grays in here, so the value is going to change throughout. If I pick a really bright color that goes with this, then I could do that together and have something that will work, hopefully enough for a contrast. So we'll see how that does. And then love Heather at Panorama Fiber, so of course I had to buy something from her. And although I was looking for something a little more semi-solid, I saw this and I just really, really love the way the colors played together in this. And I thought that the color itself was light enough that if there's any patterning in the sock, it should still show up even if there are differences in the color. That is something about the Tortoise Sock. If you finish a sock and the judges are not able to see the pattern and make sure that you've actually done the sock correctly, then you don't get points for it. So I think the yarn color is light enough that I can still show the pattern. And again, since we don't actually have the sock patterns in front of us yet, it's hard to tell for sure which will work. And then finally, this is much more variegated. There are two sock patterns that say variegation is fine. So maybe this might become one of those, or maybe this will just be something else at some point. But Teeny Button Studios, who does a lot of Harry Potter and other types of things, colorways, this colorway itself just really caught my eye, and then it's called the Night Bus. So that's fun. So I really, really like that yarn. So a lot of that is meant to be yarn for the Tortoise Sock. We will see again, like I said, once the patterns actually show up and we get into them, which yarn will go with which pattern, and whether or not I actually will use that yarn. It's kind of nice having the yarn that I dye, because if I decide, last minute that I want to make a change, I can go dig into my other stash and find something that might work there. But like I said, I did quite a bit of stashing, both at Houston and then a couple of things outside Houston Fiber Fest. So quite a bit to add to my Ravelry yarn stash. There are 2 questions in the Questions for Karen thread over on the Ravelry group. If you ever have a question you would like me to answer on the podcast, find that thread. I will link to it in the show notes. and you can post your question and I will answer it on the next episode. So both of the questions actually come from Christy Rose. So thank you, Christy, for these questions. And the first one says, do you ever think about Ravelry, privacy, and safety? A contestant on Jeopardy wore a hand-knit shawl. Within a couple of days, Ravelers had found her project page, Ravelry profile, and matched it to Facebook. It is probably silly, but that kind of freaked me out a little. What are your thoughts? Honestly, I think that the world that we live in now, there is so much out there online and on social media that there are things that I don't post ever, because I think that there are parts of my life that I do want to keep private. But for the most part, it's kind of if I really want to participate in the world, if I really want to participate in the fiber community, I have to kind of let go a little bit of some privacy. And yes, I mean, obviously this Jeopardy contestant probably was a bit overwhelmed, especially if a lot of people tried to friend her on Facebook or send her lots of messages, either that or on Ravelry. And so yeah, that was probably a large scale, lack of privacy that I hope I don't really experience, because I really don't want that much of my privacy basically compromised. But for the most part, posting pictures of myself, I'm doing the podcast, so, I'm out there anyway. And so I haven't really been that concerned about what I post. I try not to give super personal information, or to do things like say when exactly I am going to be out of town and the house is empty. Like things like Houston Fiber Fest, my husband was home the whole time, so I mean, it's kind of obvious that I'm going to be gone, but my husband was home, and so I don't say when we're going on vacation and we're going to be gone for weeks or whatever, and the house is going to be completely empty. Anybody who is posting on Facebook really should kind of be keeping those types of pieces of information a little more private. As far as things like the pets, the cats and now Luna, if they want privacy, they can't tell me. So I've been posting pictures of them quite a bit. I do try not to post pictures of my husband, because if he really wants to have lots of pictures of him, that is his choice. And I'm trying to be really careful about things that I post about my son. Sometimes he has popped up on the podcast from time to time, but I don't post very much about him on Instagram, because Instagram is something that is, I don't have a private Instagram account, because I do want people to find me, since it is technically my business account. So I don't post a lot about my son. Where I do post a little bit more personal stuff is on my personal Facebook account. And for that, I actually keep that pretty locked down. As far as who I allow on my friends list, I don't add very many people on my friends list. I am adding more and more people from the fiber community, but usually it's those people that I've interacted a lot more with, people that I actually go to knit nights and see on a more what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of more of a personal one-on-one kind of conversation, rather than if somebody just liked my yarn or liked a project that I did on Ravelry, or stopped by my booth at one point at a fiber festival. I actually have a little thing on my Facebook profile that says, if you met me at a fiber festival, this is my my personal Facebook account. I post things about my kid, and so I don't just add everyone as a friend. Thank you for understanding. Here's where you can find my business stuff. So I do try to keep my personal Facebook privacy settings private, but while at the same time still being able to open up to the people that I do have more daily or more interaction with. So that's kind of what I personally do for myself. But I figure if I focus too much on, oh my gosh, all this information is getting out there and people know about things, we're kind of in the age that's just really hard to not let a lot of those things out there. So I'm just trying to do what I can to protect, especially the people who don't have a say in it. You know, my son, he has no idea. You know, he's 6. He doesn't really know what Facebook is. He doesn't know what Instagram is. So when I'm posting pictures, he doesn't know what he's being posted. I always am very careful if I've taken a picture of Luke with like kid from his class. I very, very rarely post a picture like that. I do not post pictures of other people's children unless that's very, very rare. Sometimes if I do feel like I want to post that, I will actually blur out the faces of some of the other kids, because again, especially with children, I think that is something that we do need to kind of think about with their privacy. And I don't think it's my place to post pictures of somebody else's child, especially if it's a kid in his class, and I haven't gotten permission from the parents to be able to do that. Anyway, so there's definitely a lot that goes into it, but since I am, doing things like the podcast, I kind of have that expectation of complete privacy is not really there. But there are things that I don't tell you guys that happen in my life, and I think that's okay. I think that definitely there should be a line that does get drawn at some point. So yeah, so those are some kind of rambly thoughts about privacy and Ravelry and Facebook and Instagram. So Christy's other question is, do you think that King Arthur was an actual person or just a legend? And she said, I read about it today. I would love to know your opinion. Wow, this is like a huge topic, and I could probably do an entire episode just talking about, I could teach an entire class just talking about the origins of the King Arthur legend. So I'm gonna try to keep it kind of boiled down to a shorter version. So in complete shortness, so the way she phrased her question, let's see, go back, open this up. Do you think that King Arthur was an actual person or just a legend? Okay, do you think King Arthur was an actual person? No. Just a legend? Yes. Yes and no. Both questions. So cut and dried, King Arthur, was there actually a King Arthur? I think no. There are people that still think very much that there was an actual Arthur that was very similar to the stories, but all the evidence that I've read, I really don't buy that. It would be wonderful, but I really just don't think that. I don't think that he existed in the form that we know of him through the stories. So here's kind of my quick what I think. I do think, because there are historical chronicles that do mention a war leader that fought in battles. I think it was 13 battles, and they actually list them, but fought in some battles that happened around the year 500, which is when the Romans were leaving Britain. And so the British people who had had the Romans there, and who the Romans had been protecting them from other invaders, when the Romans left, now suddenly all these other invaders, hey, this is a really nice place, maybe we should go there. And so the native population did have to do a lot of fighting with invaders. And so there is a historical record that there was a warlord who basically really helped turn the tide on those battles, and to make at least parts of Britain a little bit safer for the inhabitants. And quite possibly his name was Arthur, or something like Arthur, and that would be as close to an actual historical figure that I would say would be Arthur. But he was not a king. He really was just basically like I said, a warlord. I think that, and again, there are lots of pieces of literature that use the Arthur story, but probably it was Geoffrey of Monmouth. his History of the Kings of Britain that really brought the idea of Arthur as the Arthur we know about more today to the forefront, and thinking about him as the king and who's uniting all of England and fighting off the Saxons and all of that. So I think that kind of taking some of those, that possibly that historical warlord or multiple people, I really also think that possibly it's a lot of different historical figures that are all wrapped up into creating this one Arthur figure. But as far as the King Arthur that exists in the way that we think of him with all the stories, no, I do not think that there was ever a historical figure that was like that. Like I said, there are lots of other theories. There's the theory of I think it's the Sarmatians, so Rio Thamus. That's something that was kind of starting to become more popular when I was in graduate school. So that is, if you're interested in this, that's a theory to kind of look up and look into. There's also the grave that was found in I think it was either the 12th century or the 13th century. I think it's 12th century, on Glastonbury, that supposedly was the grave of Arthur and Guinevere, and that proves that Arthur was a historical figure. No, if you really look at what was going on at the time when that grave was found, it was completely a political move. That it was something that was basically squashing Welsh rebellions, because the Welsh were trying to basically claim Arthur, and by having Arthur's grave be found, it was a way of England kind of taking that away from the Welsh. And also it was a tourist thing for the Glastonbury, the abbey that was there, because the abbey basically was not making very much money and they needed more money, and suddenly it becomes a tourist destination. Everyone wants to go to the grave of King Arthur. So a lot of people use that as evidence of a real King Arthur, but again, if you look at when that grave was found, and what else was going on historically at that time, I think it was definitely both a political and a tourist move. Anyway, like I said, I could go on and on about this idea, but sadly, so my answer, no, I don't think there was a historical Arthur. I do think there were potentially some historical figures, maybe one, maybe multiple, that eventually kind of grew into the whole legend that we get. But definitely the full-blown legend is just that, a legend. The second quarter's knit along is almost over. June 30th is the end of the knit along, so I wanted to show you guys some of the FOs. Again, you can go to the Ravelry group and see these. I think the last one I showed you guys was the radium that Elsie99 did. I'm pretty sure I remember showing that to you. So we have Miss Pickle Chips, who did her own version of Tsunami, and she is actually in my local knitting group, so I got to see her working on this Tsunami, and so that one's really great. And then Elsie99 also finished a Triceratops, so a pattern by Carissa Browning, which, if you just look at the shape of that shawl, definitely it lives up to its name. The Knitty Muggins did, I think this is the Newton shawl. Let's see if I click on the picture if it tells me. Of course now it doesn't want to actually show me. Just makes the picture bigger. So this is, I believe it's the Newton shawl. So there it is. She said that's pretty blocking, but it has a body and then a border that goes around on it. Then Harps 57 did a test knit for Anna Victoria, which is something about fireflies and stars. And so, again, got that low battery warning. Need to go charge my phone. So this is beautiful. There, the background is a little easier to see. So that is an Anna Victoria shawl. Again, I love all of her patterns. There's some close-ups of the beads. Absolutely gorgeous. She also did, Harps 57 also did an opaline wrap. So this is one that uses different colors and then the main color going between them. Pilar and Mike did a Cassini shawl. So kind of a neat shape there. I really like, lately I've liked shawls that go with that shape. Dragon Fairies did Tsunami. She also is in my my Monday night knit group, so all three of us were knitting on the Tsunami. That was a lot of fun to kind of see us all working on that. And Care Bear did the Space Between, which has a neat little mosaic patterning on one side of it. So there is that pattern, and so that is the last one so far that has been posted. That should make about 12 or 13 projects total. Yep, it looks like 12, 14 posts, and then mine were the first two. So yeah, so it's quite a few projects. We've got 2 prizes to give away. So basically on July 1st, I will do a drawing from the thread to see who wins those 2 prizes. And then we have the 3rd quarter knit along to look forward to. So for that knit along, basically, and this is something that's kind of evolved from some various conversations, I want to kind of shine some light on patterns that have not had very many projects attached to them. That they are probably really gorgeous, wonderful patterns, and for some reason they just got overlooked and could possibly use some extra projects. So here are the guidelines. Any shawl that has been published, that was published in 2016 or earlier, so we want to do something that's been around for a year and a half or so. So something that's had time to be out there but just hasn't developed very many patterns. So 2016 or earlier. And you can actually, when you do an advanced search on Ravelry, you can search by publication date. It's in the very bottom left side of the selections. And then also it needs to have less than 20 projects attached to it. So fewer than 20, 19 or below projects that are attached to it. So again, we're focusing on patterns that just, for one reason or another, don't have that many projects, but probably should. I started searching Ravelry. I just did shawls, sorted by number of projects, and then I started at the back end and kind of worked my way back. There are so many really pretty shawl patterns that just haven't had very many projects. So we're hopefully going to change that a little bit to get a few more projects on some of these shawl patterns. So that knit along starts on July 1st and runs through September. So July, August, and September. And look, I think I already have an idea of what I'm going to make, possibly. I have been searching for patterns. Like I said, there are so many to choose from. But I think I have an idea of what I'm going to make. Just have to think about the yarn. And I hope that you guys have fun searching some patterns that really deserve to have a little light shine on them. As far as other dyeing types of news, the big thing that I have going on now is the Yarn Club. So this is the Night of the Lion Yarn Club, and it is a 5-month club. It will start, the first shipment will go out in mid-July, and signups are going on right now. So depending on when you're watching this video, right now, until July 9th, or the club fills up. So this is one where I had that special little pre-club color, which is currently not available anymore. The pre-club time is closed. But anybody who ordered the pre-club yarn got early access to the Yarn Club, and quite a few of you did take that offer and go ahead and join the Yarn Club. So first of all, thank you very much for already joining the Yarn Club. I do have a number in my head of, this is the kind of the cutoff number, but I don't actually usually say that number because it goes by number of skeins, not necessarily number of people. So, I could have technically 4 skeins left, but if one person signs up for 4 skeins, then that would be it. It would just be one more person. Or it could be 4 people signing up for 1 skein, because for my Yarn Club, you can sign up for 1, 2, 3, or 4 skeins per month, depending on how much yardage you want to work with. Anyway, so I don't say the number because it is somewhat flexible depending upon how many skeins people pick. But right now we're sitting at right at 3/4 of the way full. So technically the Yarn Club opened yesterday for people who were not in the pre-club. In the pre-club, people already filled up the yarn club, roughly the 3/4 full mark. So there are a few spaces open, but not that many. So it might, depending on how many people sign up and how many skeins they pick, it might close before July 9th. So if you are at all interested in the yarn club, I have all the details listed on the website. You can find it on roundtableyarns.com, or you can actually also go to roundtableyarns.club, and it will redirect you directly to the page on the .com website that has everything about the yarn club. So if you have any questions about the club, please feel free to send me a message and let me know. But I'm really excited about this one. The Night of the Lion is a fun story. I really like the colors that I've got going for it. There is one base that is not one of my normal bases. It's something a little bit of an experiment base, so that will be going out in the yarn club. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think about it all. So again, I will put this in the show notes, but roundtableyarns.club will take you directly to the page that gives you all the information about it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I've been recording it while Luke is at Lego camp, and I've been keeping an eye on the time because I don't want to be late to pick him up, and I timed it just about perfectly where pretty much as soon as I end this recording, get to go take Luna out and then go pick Luke up from Lego camp. Anyway, so thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say. But again, the best part is always hearing your feedback, hearing what you have to say. I want to get that conversation going. There's a lot of stuff in here that I definitely would love to hear you talk about. There's a whole topic that I wanted to talk about that I think there's so much going on in this episode that I will cover another time, and that's some things that are going on Etsy. So hopefully I'll remember to talk about that in a future episode. But anyway, I still think there's lots of stuff that you guys could talk about in our conversation. So please go over to the Ravelry group for the podcast, and you can find the discussion thread for this episode. Post there. If you have a question you want me to answer, you can post in the questions for Karen. And then also, if you would like, you can post a comment directly on YouTube. Again, you guys have been doing that more lately since I've actually been talking about that, and I really, really appreciate that. It helps YouTube see that, hey, people are actually watching and interacting with the video, and it gets the video in front of new people. Which, again, I'm totally fine with having a small, dedicated, group of people who watch, because I love our discussions. But it's also nice to get some new eyeballs on the podcast as well. So thank you so much if you do post a comment, whether on YouTube or on Ravelry or both. And I hope to see you in the conversation and see you in the knit along and crochet along. Remember, I want to see some crochet stuff going on. So anyway, thank you again for watching. Since it's summer, like I said, the podcast schedule will be a little flexible, seeing kind of when I might have time to record. So I may be back in 2 weeks. It might be sooner, it might be a little later. We'll just see whenever I have a little bit of time to do the recording. Anyway, again, thank you. Until next time, happy knitting.